In the late 90s and early 2000s, there were few wrestlers on the planet more popular than Rob Van Dam. His innovative in-ring style combined with his unique, laid-back character touched a nerve with many fans, leading to him becoming a main event player in pretty much every promotion he ever worked with. Even today, 30 years into his storied career, RVD continues to be a big name in the industry, after having his most recent run with Impact. So, how has he managed to maintain such longevity, and what has kept him going this whole time? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey in One of a Kind, the Rob Van Dam story. Robert Alexander Satkowski was born on December 18, 1970 in Battle Creek, Michigan. Here, he developed an early interest in pro wrestling and regularly began attending shows as a youth. He was in attendance at the historic WrestleMania 3 on March 29, 1987, and later that year, he even managed to get himself selected from the audience at a WWE house show, being given $1,000 to kiss Ted DiBiase's foot. As well as his love of wrestling, the Michigan native also developed a taste for martial arts, training in karate, taekwondo, aikido, kendo, and kickboxing, all of which he would weave into his in-ring style once he came of age. That time came a couple of years later when, in 1990, he had started performing on the local Michigan circuit. By 1991, Satkowski had already been given the name Rob Van Dam on account of his similarity to martial artist and B-movie star Jean-Claude Van Damme. During these early years, RVD made appearances for the likes of the United States Wrestling Association and South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, with the latter of which being where he would win his first ever title, becoming SAPW Tag Team Champions with Chaz Rocco. He also managed to make his way overseas during these first few years, working for All Japan Pro Wrestling, where he became somewhat of a featured player in their junior division. Despite this early success, however, Rob's first taste of the big-time stateside wouldn't come until 1992, when he signed with WCW, albeit now under the name of Robbie V. Robbie V's debut match for the company happened on January 23, 1993, and he proved popular enough with fans that after only a month on the roster, he would be put into a tournament to determine the new television champion, getting to the second round before being eliminated by Vinny Vegas, aka Kevin Nash. Unfortunately, Bill Watts, WCW's executive vice president at the time, was of a far more traditional mindset and didn't see much potential in Van Dam despite his performances getting over. The more high-flying martial arts style didn't fit with his view of old-school professional wrestling, and so RVD's appearances dried up over the remainder of the year, with him being gone by May 22, 1993, having done very little of note during his time there. He was disappointed, of course, but was able to keep going by jumping straight back into the indies, continuing to develop a name for himself as one of the most exciting young wrestlers out there. No matter what the older guard may have thought, the Michigan native would soon become a large component in remaking wrestling for the 90s, turning it into something new and youthful again. Over in Philadelphia, a young promoter named Paul Heyman had taken the reins of Eastern Championship Wrestling, rebranding it as Extreme Championship Wrestling and setting about starting a revolution. He argued that the industry had become stale and needed its own version of Nirvana to come along and shake things up like that band had done with the music scene. This meant innovation, high-flying, hardcore brawling, and embracing the counterculture, all of which applied perfectly to Rob Van Dam. Seeing his potential, Heyman signed RVD up in the summer of 1996, where he quickly became one of ECW's top stars. There, he portrayed a laid-back stoner character, something which wasn't really a gimmick at all given that Van Dam had long been a proponent of cannabis use, even later using it as part of his catchphrase, RVD 420 means I just smoked your ass, which itself was a play on Austin 3:16. There was more to him than just this, of course. He was presented as a world-class martial artist who could take on all comers and get angry whenever he needed to. This element of his character was brought to the forefront when he got into a memorable series of matches against Sabu, among the best of either man's career at that point. These allowed Rob to really show fans what he was capable of, not just in ring, but on the mic as well after he turned heel on the homicidal, suicidal, genocidal, death-defying maniac. As intense as the feud between the two men was, though, they eventually realized that they were better off together and began teaming up in 1997, going on to become one of the most successful tag teams in the promotion's history. In late '97, they feuded with the Eliminators over the ECW World Tag Team titles, but despite 3 attempts, they were unable to win the belts. After this, RVD was brought in as a substitute for an injured Chris Candido to face Lance Storm at the company's first ever pay-per-view, Barely Legal, on April 13, 1997. After winning the match, Van Dam berated the company for not booking him originally, something which had been a real-life point of contention between him and Heyman. He also scolded any in the audience who cheered for him, reminding him that he was only there so that he could get noticed by the big leagues. This was a popular tactic that heel RVD had been using for a while up until this point, making it clear to crowds that he would leave them behind for a WWE or WCW contract at the drop of a hat. He was able to play this up even more after ECW invaded WWE in May 1997 as part of a working relationship the two promotions had developed. It was during this period that Rob was given the moniker of Mr. Monday Night by Jerry Lawler, something which would stick with him for years afterwards. Back in Philadelphia, he continued teaming with Sabu and got into a memorable feud with the heart and soul of ECW, Tommy Dreamer, who was angry about RVD's disregard for the company and its fans. They ended up having a series of matches together, both in tags with Sabu and Taz, and as singles competitors. The best among these were probably their one-on-one hardcore contest at August 1997's Born to be Wired, their flag match at that year's November to Remember, and their tag team match at December 6th's Better Than Ever, where Van Dam got the pinfall over Dreamer, ending the rivalry once and for all. Despite continuing to be the heel during this program, Mr. Monday Night was so over with fans by now that the company had little choice but to turn him face. By 1998, he was firmly on the side of the good guys, starting a feud with the Triple Threat, the team of Shane Douglas, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Chris Candido. This climaxed with RVD finally winning his first singles title when he was able to pin Bigelow on April 4th of that year to capture the ECW television title. He would subsequently go on to have a reign which was among the greatest in modern history. This wasn't the only gold that the fan favorite would carry in 1998 though, as he and Sabu also became tag team champions on June 29th after they beat Lance Storm and Chris Candido. And though they would lose those belts to the Dudley Boys by October, no one was able to wrestle the TV title away from Rob. With this around his waist, he put on some absolute classic matches throughout 98 and 99 against the likes of Too Cold Scorpio, Lance Storm, and most notably, Jerry Lynn. Their Hardcore Heaven bout in particular was so highly praised that Paul Heyman even decided to re-air it on TV the next week in order to expose it to a larger audience. So highly did Van Dam elevate the belt during this time that at points people were talking about it as being more prestigious than the world title, and discussions of a champion versus champion match were a regular thing to hear amongst the ECW Hardcore. By 2000, the suspense had been built up to a boiling point, and Heyman decided it was finally time to pull the trigger, with him booking the match pitting the TV champion against the, at the time, current ECW champion Mike Awesome. Unfortunately for everyone, though, RVD broke his ankle during the lead-up to this bout and was forced to vacate the belt before it could take place. By the time he did return to action on May 14, 2000, the moment had passed, and the company was on its dying embers. With massive financial issues causing havoc backstage, Heyman found he was unable to pay many of his performers. This saw some jumping ship to WWE or WCW, while others remained, hoping that things would soon turn around. Of course, they never did, and by the time Mr. Monday Night made his last ECW appearance at January 7, 2001's Guilty as Charged, he was allegedly owed $150,000, something he hasn't been paid to this day. With the closure of ECW in the first quarter of 2001, and the purchase of WCW by Vince McMahon around that same time, the wrestling landscape had suddenly become very different. And if you were without a big contract, then there was now only one place to go. Thankfully for RVD, his reputation preceded him, and he was brought in by WWE on July 9th of that year as part of the Alliance, the villainous union of WCW and ECW alumni hell-bent on taking down the Stamford Company. Almost immediately, Van Dam got over with WWE fans, some of whom had seen him before, and some of whom were watching him for the first time. Despite the entire alliance being portrayed as heels, he quickly became a firm fan favorite, and one of the bright spots of the woeful storyline. He even got to challenge for the WWE title in a triple threat match with Steve Austin and Kurt Angle at the October 21, 2001 No Mercy pay-per-view. It was a match that many believed he should have won, in fact, with those pushing for him reasoning that the company should have struck while the iron was hot and made a superstar. Unfortunately, backstage politics put a stop to this, with many WWE stalwarts arguing that the ECW original hadn't yet paid his dues. Because of this, he wouldn't be victorious in the triple threat title match, though his popularity would remain strong. When the Invasion storyline ended at that year's Survivor Series, RVD kept his job, now turning babyface and feuding with William Regal over the Intercontinental title. And at his first WrestleMania appearance on March 17, 2002, he was able to hit his signature 5-star frog splash on the Englishman, pinning him to become the Intercontinental Champion for the first time. Soon after this, WWE held their inaugural draft, and Mr. Monday Night lived up to his moniker when he was picked up by Raw. There, he continued to find success, getting into a great feud with Eddie Guerrero that allowed both men to highlight their strong points. On top of this, he also got a brief Phantom Heavyweight title win on the May 20th episode of Raw, beating The Undertaker to a rapturous crowd response before the decision was overturned by the brand's general manager, Ric Flair. After that, he successfully defended his Intercontinental title against newcomer Brock Lesnar in June and July of 2002, and became the last ever European champion after unifying the belts on the July 22nd episode of Raw. He followed that up by doing the same for the Hardcore title a month later, beating Tommy Dreamer in the process. At this point, it looked like he might even scoop up every title on the show, an idea that was strengthened when he became the #1 contender to Triple H's World Heavyweight Championship on September 9th at Unforgiven. When the time came and RVD finally got his shot at the big one, fans were desperate for it, as were many backstage. Unfortunately, though, this match came right in the middle of Triple H's infamous reign of terror, where he buried just about every former ECW and WCW star put in his path for over a year. Van Dam, of course, was no different and would fall victim here too. Nevertheless, he continued to be one of the most popular stars on the roster and took place in the first ever Elimination Chamber match at that year's Survivor Series, where he was arguably the highlight of the whole show, using his creativity to come up with some very unique spots inside the cage. Taking note of his standout performance that night, the company once again pushed him into a main event role, giving him a shot at Shawn Michaels' World Heavyweight title on the November 25th episode of Raw, in what was considered a dream match for many at the time. Sadly, he didn't win that one either, but he would soon become a tag team champion, forming an unlikely partnership with Kane, which paid off when the duo beat Lance Storm and Chief Morley for the belts on the March 31st, 2003 edition of Raw. This title run was short-lived though, as Kane turned heel on his partner after being forced to remove his mask, beating RVD in a steel cage match on the September 8th, 2003 Raw. Still, despite all these losses, his time was coming. Van Dam feuded with Chris Jericho over the Intercontinental title over the next 2 months, and from there began a program with Evolution where, alongside his new tag team partner Booker T, he was able to beat Ric Flair and Batista to become a World Tag Team Champion once again on February 16, 2004. A month later, he was drafted over to SmackDown, where he teamed up with Rey Mysterio, eventually winning the WWE Tag Team titles with him that same year. Yes, he was on an upward swing, one that could only be stopped by injury. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened when on January 27, 2005, RVD was forced to undergo reconstructive knee surgery, taking him out of action for over 7 months. While out of the ring, he was instrumental in convincing Vince McMahon to revive ECW in mid-2000 for the One Night Stand pay-per-view, and it was here on this brand that his real potential would be realized. He returned to in-ring competition at the 2006 Royal Rumble and won the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 22, giving him a WWE title shot at a time and place of his choosing. However, it wasn't until he was drafted to ECW's weekly TV show on May 29, 2006 that he vowed to cash in his contract at the second One Night Stand pay-per-view a month later, telling fans he would take home the title and rechristen it as Extreme in the process. On June 11th, One Night Stand 2 saw John Cena accept RVD's challenge in front of one of the most electric crowds ever seen around a wrestling ring. The ECW faithful treated Van Dam like their savior, while the champ was booed out of the building as soon as he arrived. One now iconic fan sign could even be seen on screen reading, "If Cena wins, we riot." Thankfully, Cena did not win. With an assist from Edge, the Hardcore Original was able to pin John in 20 minutes and 40 seconds that night, finally realizing his potential by becoming the WWE Champion. The next night, he was also crowned the ECW Champion by Paul Heyman, with RVD dismissing the WWE belt as secondary and vowing to defend it separately. He would live up to his promise for a little while too, holding off challenges from Edge and Kurt Angle until he was arrested on drug possession charges in early July 2006, getting suspended for 30 days as a result and being forced to drop both straps on TV days later. When he returned to TV on the August 8th episode of ECW, things had changed. He had dropped the ball so quickly after being handed it, and now Vince McMahon would never trust him to be champion again. He remained a featured star on ECW and WWE, but it wouldn't be to the same level. Van Dam, for his part, was feeling his own frustrations. He was never much for the corporate lifestyle, and frequently found himself irritated with some of the things he was being asked to do, such as travel to Afghanistan to perform for the US troops during his days off. After a kayfabe injury suffered at the hands of Randy Orton at the One Night Stand show, he was written off TV and allowed his contract to expire. Mr. Monday Night was burned out and needed to recharge his love for wrestling again. He did this by mostly taking the next 3 years off, only making a few sporadic appearances on the indie circuit over this period until he was ready to sign with a major promotion once again. Surprisingly to some though, when the time came, he didn't sign with WWE, but TNA instead. On March 8, 2010, RVD made his debut with the Nashville promotion and immediately began a feud with Sting. So quickly did he shoot up the ladder there that by the April 19th episode of Impact, he had won the TNA World title from AJ Styles, and followed this up with successful defenses against the likes of Desmond Wolfe, Abyss, and Mr. Anderson. He didn't lose the belt until the August 19th episode of Impact, and only did so then because his contracted dates for that year were running out, forcing him to vacate it. A round of renegotiations later, however, and he would be back on TV. From here, he and his stable of former ECW stars named EV2 feuded with Hulk Hogan's group Immortal, all while Van Dam continued to work as a single star too, having multiple near misses at becoming the TNA World Champion once again throughout 2011 and 2012. While he was unable to regain the gold, the former WWE Champion was at least able to take some solace when he beat Zema Ion for the TNA X Division title at October 14, 2012's Bound for Glory, marking his first reign with the belt. He defended this against all comers, including the likes of Joey Ryan, Kid Cash, and Austin Aries, reinvigorating himself by putting on some of the best performances of his career even at this later stage. He had held on to the title for a full 137 days by the time his reign was over, only dropping it as his contract was expiring once more. Now that he was going to be a free agent again, fans began speculating as to what would happen next. Would RVD re-sign with TNA, or would he go back to WWE? The latter, as it turned out. Despite his great on-screen performances, the Michigan native was frustrated with the attitudes of many of his co-workers behind the scenes at Impact, and decided that WWE was the best option for him. He re-debuted at the June 14, 2013 Money in the Bank pay-per-view to a huge ovation, then quickly followed that up by getting into a World Heavyweight title program against Alberto Del Rio. Despite briefly being in the title picture, it was clear at this point that WWE weren't going to push him as their top main event star. Still, he was just as popular as he ever had been with fans, and he'd barely lost a step in the ring, so he remained a valuable performer in that crucial upper mid-card role, something which the man himself seemed happy to be slotted into. He dipped in and out of the Intercontinental title picture throughout the rest of that year, and into the next, until his contract expired in the summer of 2014, his last match coming against Seth Rollins on the August 29th episode of SmackDown. It seemed that, while he'd had fun during that year, a full-time schedule wasn't really anything RVD felt the need to keep up anymore. He had other outside pursuits he wanted to follow anyway, with him often making appearances in the media as an advocate for the legalization of cannabis. He did continue to make appearances on the indie circuit though, facing off against other stars of the 2000s, like Scott Steiner and John Morrison, over the next 3 years, and even popping up in Tommy Dreamer's House of Hardcore promotion. Now nursing a number of health issues and looking like he was ready to ease into retirement, many assumed that this was how things would go from here on in for the former ECW star, further winding down until he hung up his boots for good. Those fans were surprised when Van Dam signed with Impact Wrestling once again on February 8, 2019. By this point, the company was under new management, and the deal he had agreed to was a short-term one, only requiring him to work limited dates. Even with these parameters in place, however, he was able to have another career revival, as he had some very good matches against the likes of the Lucha Brothers and Sami Callihan. He also turned heel for the first time in years and began portraying the character of a middle-aged divorcee going through a midlife crisis, flaunting around with his two girlfriends, Katie Forbes and Jennifer Barlow. On top of this, he also got to make a cameo WWE appearance on the July 22, 2019 Raw Reunion show, despite being under contract with Impact at the time. As of September 2020, however, his current deal with Impact Wrestling has run out, and RVD has yet to re-sign with them. At this point, it looks like it might finally be over for Van Dam. And if it is, then what a run it's been. Still, given what we've seen in the past, we wouldn't be surprised if he pops up at a few more shows once the world gets back to normal. To be honest, it wouldn't even be a shock to see him get one more legacy run in WWE before it's all said and done. Even if he doesn't come back to the ring, he's a future Hall of Famer for sure. Someone who will go down as an innovator, influencing a whole generation with his high-flying maneuvers, martial arts style offense, and willingness to do what was best for him when push came to shove. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.